The talks in Vietnam between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un abruptly collapsed. No deal, no ceremonial niceties, and little hope now for a quick ending to the nuclear standoff on the Korean Peninsula. Trump, as we see there is Air Force One flying home hours early after rejecting Kim's demand that all sanctions against North Korea be lifted as part of any deal.
They wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion.
So, the end to the summit and the second attempt by Donald Trump to get Kim Jong-un to commit to concrete steps toward ending its nuclear program. And going into this summit, as we spoke with our Asia correspondent Sasha Petrusik yesterday, that was, of course, the goal, to move beyond the vague pleasantries of the first summit. Let's go back to Sasha in Beijing to update where things stand. The abrupt conclusion of summit number 2, Sasha. What have we learned after that news conference that Trump gave?
Well, Heather, you know, the whole setting of what happened today was so surprising. Both of the leaders continued to smile and shake hands and talk about optimism as they went into these working sessions today. There was a table set for them to have a working lunch, and nobody showed up for that lunch or for that meal. Everything was canceled just before that happened. It seems that what happened was that Kim Jong-un, as you mentioned, demanded that all of the sanctions against his country, these crippling sanctions from the U.S. and from the UN, be lifted, and that then he would work toward denuclearization. In return, his concrete step was that he would shut down the main nuclear reactor in North Korea, Yongbyon, that area around there. There's actually evidence from satellites this week that it has continued producing weapons-grade plutonium even as this summit went ahead, that the weapons program was continuing. Well, Kim Jong-un said, I'm going to shut that down in exchange for the lifting of sanctions. Well, as it turned out, that wasn't enough for the Americans, because they said, what happens to secondary reactors that we know exist? What happens to all of the missile launchers and the warheads and all of the rest of that stuff? And apparently the answer wasn't enough for the Americans from the North Korean side, and they decided to walk out. That's also surprising, because many thought that Donald Trump would pretty much accept anything at this summit just so that he could show that he'd progressed, that he in fact was the father of denuclearization in North Korea. Turns out that wasn't the case.
We talked so much about the specifics, what people thought was going to be up on the table for this, the shutting down of a test site, the ending of hostilities from the Korean War years and years ago. None of that now coming true. So what happens next, Sasha?
Well, it seems that nothing really happens next. The sanctions will stay in place. Donald Trump said as much at his sort of hastily rearranged news conference before he got on Air Force One. He said the sanctions will remain. All of them will stay in place, even though there is some suggestion that they've been weakened in places like China, which is the main trading partner for North Korea. But the Americans are determined that they will stay in place. Presumably, the weapons program in North Korea will also continue, as it has even since the last summit, even since we heard promises that it would start to be dismantled. And there's one other question, which is, of course, key, and that is whether or not North Korea would continue testing its missiles, whether they'd keep firing intercontinental ballistic missiles toward the United States to see if they would work, and blowing up nuclear material underground. Well, Donald Trump had an answer for that, too, at his news conference. This is what he had to say.
One of the things, importantly, that Chairman Kim promised me last night is, regardless, he's not going to do testing of rockets and nuclear, not going to do testing. So, you know, I trust him, and I take him at his word. I hope that's true.
You know, it's interesting because if you listen to that quote and you listen to some of the parts of that news conference today, just from the body language of Donald Trump, he seems a lot less sure of what he's being told by Kim Jong-un. He still says he's his friend, and he insists that that's the case and that they left on good terms and that talks will continue. But every time he says something like this, what he just said, he always is very careful to attribute it and say, I hope that's true. Heather?
Sasha, thank you very much. And we'll speak again as the morning goes on. For ongoing reaction to this, our Asia correspondent, Sasha Petrusik from Beijing this morning.